I love brisket, but as a busy dad, what I don't love is what I miss out on while I'm tending that brisket all day. I need to go to my nephew's baseball game this Saturday and also have a perfect brisket ready for dinner. So I need a recipe that doesn't involve spritzing, wrapping, probing, or really doing anything to the brisket all day. I need to be able to put the brisket in the smoker, forget about it all day, and then open the smoker lid to find a perfectly rested, ready to slice brisket for dinner. Basically, the ultimate lazy dad recipe. The key to this method is to put the brisket in the foil boat right when I put it in the pellet grill. The foil acts as a heat deflector to prevent the bottom of the brisket from getting dried out from the direct heat of the fire pot below during the first part of the cook. And then as the brisket loses moisture during the second part of the cook, all those juices stay close to the bottom of the brisket and keep it hydrated. And on top of all this, the real beauty of the foil boat is the top of the brisket will form a nice smoky bark while everything else stays nice and juicy. Now, I've tried other methods like elevating the brisket off the bottom of the grate and putting a water pan below it to block the direct heat. And I've also tried starting out by adding water to the foil boat. But the best method I've found is starting with an empty foil boat at the very beginning of the cook. The design of the foil boat is also really critical, which I'll get to really soon. I wanted to take a quick minute to thank Magic Spoon for sponsoring this video. I've been focusing a lot on my health this year, and Magic Spoon has been a big part of that. Since I started eating it for breakfast, I've had much more energy throughout the day and less trips to the fridge for snacks. How does it give me more energy and less cravings? Well, Magic Spoon is basically cereal reinvented. It's cereal, but it's not the type of high-carb, high-sugar cereal you might be used to. It has 0 grams of sugar, a whopping 13 to 14 grams of protein, and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving, other than the honey nut flavor, which has 1 gram of sugar, which is still pretty low. All that protein gives me a slow burn of energy throughout the day and ensures I'm not starving by the time dinner rolls around. And on top of that, it only has 140 calories per serving, and it's also keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and also low carb. I also really like how I can build my very own variety box and choose from any flavor I want, including cocoa, frosted, peanut butter, cookies and cream, maple waffle, blueberry muffin, and these are my personal favorites, fruity and cinnamon roll. So good. Plus, there's the newly reformulated honey nut flavor, which my wife really likes, and I think that's her favorite. You can click the link in the description below to get some Magic Spoon cereal today, and when you do, make sure you use my code STBBQ on checkout when you're building your variety box for $5 off of your purchase. One really cool thing about Magic Spoon is it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. That means if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked, which is really awesome. So click the link below and use the code STBBQ for $5 off, or go to magicspoon.com/STBBQ to save $5 off your order today, and be sure to add that honey nut flavor to your custom box because it's awesome. Also, for my Canadian and British fans, Magic Spoon is now shipping to Canada and the UK, so you can enjoy it too. Now, my plan is to eat this for dinner on Saturday night, so Friday night after work, I get a really sharp knife and I round the corners off of the flat, and then I shave off the pieces of the fat cap until it's about a 1/4 inch thick or less. It helps to freeze the brisket for about 2 hours before you start carving, just makes it much easier. The goal here is not to cut deep enough to expose the meat on the fat cap, but you also want to shave off enough fat so it's no thicker than a 1/4 inch. It sounds hard, but it's really easy to do. If you go slow and just make little peak cuts to see how thick the fat is in the area you're shaving, and then shave off the rest of that fat once you see how deep it is. The purpose of trimming the brisket cap down to a 1/4 inch or less is to help it render during the cook. If you leave it too thick, then your fat is not going to get fully rendered, and people will basically just peel a strip of fat off that is chewy and it's not really edible. So make sure you get it as thin as possible. Next step is to carve out the hard fat on the sides of the brisket. And finally, you want to carve off the silver skin and extra fat on the bottom. That silver skin is going to prevent smoke from getting to the brisket, and it doesn't render at all. So you really want to trim as much as you can off. If you want a classic Texas-style brisket look, then you can take the additional step of shaving off the hump to make the brisket more aerodynamic and teardrop-shaped. Usually I like to keep it on because it's extra meat, but recently I've experimented with just taking it right off. That's one good-looking brisket. Now, for the rub, I'm applying mustard binder just to help everything stick, and I'm using 50-50 salt and pepper, so kosher salt and coarse-grained pepper. I'm using some granulated garlic, which I've really loved using recently. It really helps the bark to darken up a lot. and it fills out the rub on top of the brisket without adding too much salt or too much sugar to the brisket. It's kind of like a neutral flavored rub ingredient that you can add to give your brisket more of that barky, dark look. And I'm topping it off with Heavy Smoke Black Label, which is one of my favorite brisket rubs to add as the last layer of my rub. Moving on to the foil boat method, I'm laying down 2 sheets of heavy-duty aluminum foil, and then I'm rolling up both of the long sides over a long tube of scrunched up foil. This creates kind of the structural integrity of the sides of the boat, and it gives it stability. Then I roll up the short sides and I squish down the edges until they're only about a 1/2 inch deep. And this is really important. I don't want to make the sides too tall because then they hold too much liquid as the brisket loses moisture, and it can actually boil the bottom of the brisket and overcook the flat really easily. I ruined 2 briskets doing it this way during my recipe testing because I made the sides too tall and it held too much moisture and boiled the bottom of the brisket. So make sure you're keeping those sides of the foil boat really, really low. Now at 8 p.m., I'm placing the brisket on my pellet grill and I'm inserting my probes. I'm setting up a bunch of probes here, but the most important one to monitor is the one in the flat. With this recipe, we're shooting for a finishing temperature of 190 degrees Fahrenheit in the flat, and the reason I'm going by temperature in the flat is that it's going to cook the fastest due to the heat coming mainly from the bottom of the pellet grill. Just the way that the pellet grill operates, you have a lot of heat coming up from the fire pot, hitting that deflector plate, and all of the heat comes from below. If I go by the temperature in the point, then my flat might be way overcooked by the time my point reaches 190. After that, I'm setting my Traeger to 175 degrees Fahrenheit. The low setting is going to create more smoke and form that nice smoky bark overnight while I sleep. And when I wake up in the morning, I crank the temperature up to 225 degrees Fahrenheit from my phone, and I carry on enjoying my Saturday, which in this case means spending time with my wife and my son Jacob during morning coffee. And then we actually went to my nephew's baseball game, and I just monitored my brisket temperature and the temperature of the Traeger remotely from my phone. And this is what this recipe is really all about. It might not be the perfect way to cook a brisket. It might not be the same quality and taste that I get from my offset smoker, but it allows me to spend time with my family that I couldn't commit otherwise if I was tending my offset smoker all day. Over the past year, I've really been trying to become more of what I would call an oak tree of my family, someone who's always there for family and friends. I wasn't really there for family for a large part of my life because I was either in the army and then I pursued a busy career as a lawyer that I always prioritized over family. And in a way, this recipe is my attempt to prioritize family while also not giving up on what I love to do, which is barbecue. And at the baseball game, I also invited my dad over for dinner. He just returned from Mongolia after a long trip away, so that raised the stakes even more to have a really good brisket. When the temperature of the flat reaches 190 Fahrenheit, which can be anywhere between around 15 to 20 hours, depending on the size of your brisket, I shut my pellet grill down and I let the brisket rest inside the smoker for at least 2 hours until dinner. And at dinner time, I opened my smoker up to find a perfectly cooked and rested brisket that was ready to slice. Speaking of slicing, I like to make sure my brisket is rested down to 140 degrees Fahrenheit before I slice into it. I find this is the perfect temperature where the brisket retains moisture and it also doesn't oxidize as much. If you slice it when it's too hot, it'll appear to dry out really quickly and it'll look dull and brown. That's the oxidation. This brisket tasted really good. The flat was perfectly cooked. One thing I would say is that the point was a little bit underdone for my taste because it only got up to around 175 or 180. I know from recipe testing that waiting for the point to hit 190 often results in an overcooked and kind of pot roasty tasting flat. So to me, it's a small price to pay for the convenience of this recipe. I can always just slice the point thinner if it's a bit underdone. Another pro tip, you can add some juiciness to your brisket by squeezing some of that seam fat onto the cutting board and then coating your slices into it as you make each slice. That extra fat on the slices of perfectly cooked brisket had my family asking for seconds and raving about my brisket over the dinner table, which kind of feels like cheating because I put almost no effort into this. But hey, that's why I called it the lazy dad recipe.